If you died right now, what would you wish you had done? That's a question that's haunted me for years. And the best part is, it's the protagonist of the film noir book asking it to himself. And just like in the movie, I don't have an answer. I've never had one answer. There are so many things I want to do before I die, but the worst part is, why aren't you doing them? I'm sure you've felt this way before. Like you're in a place where you don't belong, and every passing minute feels like an eternity. It's as if something's holding you back. But here, I want to bring in a question, this time from Nietzsche. What if a demon were to come to you and say that you must live your life over and over again, exactly the same with no change whatsoever? Would you embrace that fate joyfully, or would it be an unbearable curse? That's the idea of eternal recurrence. And if that thought gives you discomfort or even horror, then something is deeply wrong. But if you would gladly relive your life eternally, then you are in a state of fully lived existence. We can use that as a kind of measure. Before doing something, or even before avoiding something, stop and ask yourself, is this really what I want? Do I truly want to live with this decision forever? Eternal recurrence leaves no room for escape. There are no promises of redemption, no fresh starts. Whatever it is, it's this life, and only this life, and it must be fully affirmed. But how can we fully affirm our lives without first understanding ourselves? Even the simple idea of being yourself is terrifying on its own. What if being yourself isn't something good? What if, when you look inward, all you find are fears, insecurities, and a bottomless pit of dissatisfaction? Martin Heidegger said that we live our lives trying to avoid the most undeniable truth of existence, death. He called this being toward death, the idea that our finitude shouldn't be ignored, but faced head-on. Because it's only when we accept our own mortality that we're able to make real, honest decisions. Otherwise, we're just numb, following a script we never wrote, waiting for the day when, magically, everything will finally make sense. But what if that day never comes? What if you don't like who you are? In Beyond Good and Evil, Nietzsche says, "He who fights with monsters must take care, lest he thereby become a monster. And if you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you." That's the risk of self-knowledge. There's always the danger that, in trying to understand ourselves, we end up becoming what we once despised. And that's where the cruelest trap of existence lies. The deeper you look within, the more you realize just how much of your life has been shaped by voices that aren't your own. Parents, teachers, religion, fears, trauma, other people's expectations. Being yourself is a call to rebellion, but also to responsibility. Because once you strip away all those imposed layers, what's left? What's left is you, naked, imperfect, flawed. And what do you do with that person? That's where many people lose their way. Some try to rebuild themselves with more convincing masks. Others simply give up. But somewhere between those two extremes, there are those who face that emptiness as a starting point. Not to reinvent themselves into something perfect, but to finally start living truthfully. And it's at that exact moment that time starts calling in its debt. Because the more self-aware you become, the more you realize how much time you've wasted being someone you weren't. And what's left is a discomforting feeling, a whisper asking, what if it's already too late? And it's precisely that late awareness that often condemns us to our deepest regrets. Because when we finally manage to silence the world around us and hear our own voice, we realize it's been screaming for attention all along. But the truth is, hearing that voice takes courage. The courage to admit that we've wasted time, that we were cowards, that we betrayed ourselves for the sake of acceptance or comfort. And it's at that point, when self-deception is no longer possible, that regret shows up, not as a passing memory, but as a persistent ghost that reminds us of the life we could have lived. Regret carries tremendous weight. Bronnie Ware, an Australian nurse who cared for people on their deathbeds, recorded the 5 most common regrets of the dying. I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. I wish I hadn't worked so hard. I wish I'd had the courage to express my feelings. I wish I had stayed in touch with my friends. I wish I had let myself be happier. I can think of at least one situation in my own life, if not many, that fits each one of those regrets. And now, I bring Nietzsche's question back to you. Would you accept reliving all those moments of your life, knowing you'd have no power to change any of them? If that question made you uncomfortable, let's look at it from another angle. Even though you have to go through those painful moments again, you know that somehow there's meaning waiting for you on the other side. And that leads us to Viktor Frankl, an Austrian psychiatrist who survived the concentration camps and dedicated much of his work to the search for meaning. He believed that finding purpose is essential for human survival and fulfillment, and pointed to 3 main paths for doing so: creating work, or performing a meaningful act, experiencing something, or connecting deeply with someone. Taking a courageous attitude in the face of unavoidable suffering. But what does this have to do with being yourself and facing your inner abyss? When we look at regrets, they're all tied to things we didn't do, and to find purpose, we must do something. So if we know this, why don't we act? Most of the time, if not always, because of imposed norms. We cling to the belief that we have to work our whole lives just to retire someday, that we can't express our feelings, that we have to accept things just as they are. The higher we soar, the smaller we appear to those who cannot fly. Nietzsche thus spoke Zarathustra. Traditions and ideologies that offer comfort can prevent true self-development. We must be free to create our own values and be willing to be misunderstood, ridiculed, even hated. And that might mean quitting your job to live on the other side of the world, starting a fight club, or even proclaiming that God is dead. Because for each person to create their own meaning, the collapse of absolute values is necessary. Without divine guidelines, we are thrown into the responsibility of shaping our lives according to our own will and understanding, living one day at a time, but becoming more ourselves with each passing day.